Ariella Hayes didn't mean to catch a stranger's eye, she only meant to return the ticket he dropped. "Excuse me, sir," she called, weaving through the crowd in the gilded lobby of the majestic Grand Theater. The man ahead didn't hear her, or if he did, he ignored it. Ariella picked up her pace, clutching the glossy black envelope with gold embossing box seat, row A no less. She finally caught up to him at the stairs leading up to the balcony. He was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit, and when he turned around, she nearly forgot why she was there. He was gorgeous. His hair was a little messy, like he hadn't bothered to style it, and his jaw looked like it hadn't seen a razor in a couple of days. But his eyes clear, steel blue, landed on her with such directness she almost dropped the ticket. "You dropped this," she said, holding it out. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "That's mine. I didn't even notice." "You were about to walk into the wrong section," she said, glancing at the usher who looked confused holding the door open. He took it with a small laugh. "Well, you saved me from watching the show from the coat closet." "Thank you." Ariella, his hand brushed hers as he took the ticket. "Kellan Grant," she blinked. "Wait, like Grant Industries?" He gave a modest shrug. "That's my family's company." She smiled politely, even though her brain screamed a little. Kellan Grant. As in, one of the most talked about young millionaires in the country. He owned half the real estate in the city and had a reputation for being impossible to track down, and yet here he was. Alone. No entourage, no suit with a Bluetooth in his ear. Just a man with surprisingly kind eyes about to watch a musical. He looked at the empty space beside him, then back at her. "What seat do you have?" "Ooh, back row balcony," she said, feeling her cheeks flush. He raised a brow. "How about trading up?" She blinked. "I'm sorry, my box has 2 seats. I'm alone. You just saved my evening. Let me return the favor. I don't even know you." "You do now, Kellan Grant, and you're Ariella," he said, his mouth twitching into something close to a grin. "I won't bite." "Unless you're holding popcorn, in which case I can't make promises." She laughed before she could stop herself. "All right, but just for the show." "Just for the show," he agreed. They walked up together, and the ushers practically bowed as Kellan handed over his ticket, nodding at Ariella like she'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, she had. The box was private, with plush red seats and a perfect view of the stage. Ariella sat down, trying not to gawk at the velvet curtains or the view. "You come here often?" Kellan asked, watching her take it all in. She turned to him. "Is that a pickup line?" "Only if it's working," she laughed again. "Honestly, I love theater. I save up for months just to get nosebleed seats." He nodded, thoughtful. "You know, I used to come here with my mom when I was a kid. She would dress me up in a bow tie and everything. I hated it back then. And now, I'd give anything to have one more of those nights." Her chest tightened. That wasn't the answer she expected. The lights dimmed before she could respond. The music swelled, the stage lit up, and for a while they didn't speak. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like they were both lost in the same magic. At intermission, he leaned closer. "All right, tell me your real job. You don't work in finance, do you?" "God, no," she laughed. "I'm a waitress and a part-time art teacher, and sometimes a dog walker. Depends on the week." He blinked. "Seriously," she shrugged. "I pay rent, I paint when I can." "I'm not ashamed of it." His expression shifted, interested, but not in a pitying way. "I like that, you're honest." "What about you?" she asked. "What do you actually do when you're not dropping expensive tickets and luring women into box seats?" He laughed. "I'm trying to not be the guy everyone expects me to be." She tilted her head. "Which is cold, calculated, untouchable, all that. Are you?" He looked at her for a moment. "Not with you." Her breath caught. The rest of the show passed in a blur. She forgot about the actors, the music, even the applause. All she could think about was how her life had somehow shifted in the middle of a Broadway theater. After the final curtain call, they lingered in the box until most of the audience had cleared. "I can call a car for you," he said as they walked toward the exit. "I usually take the subway." He winced. "Not tonight, please. Let me drive you." She gave in, mostly because the idea of extending this strange, dreamlike night was too tempting. Outside, a sleek black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door as Kellan guided her in like it was the most natural thing in the world. As they pulled away, she stared out the window, still trying to process what just happened. Kellan glanced at her. "Can I see you again?" She hesitated. "I know it's fast," he added. "But I feel like I've known you longer than 2 hours." She turned to him. "I don't usually do this." "I don't either," he said quietly. She smiled. "Then, maybe we're both doing something new." He reached over, gently tugging a loose curl behind her ear. "That's the best thing I've heard in weeks." When the car pulled up to her apartment in Brooklyn, he got out first, walking her to her door. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For letting me crash your night." "Ariella," he said, stepping closer, "you didn't crash it. You made it." She looked up at him, and for a second she thought he might kiss her, but he didn't. He just looked at her like she was something rare. "Good night," he said, his voice low. "Good night, Kellan." He walked back toward the car, and she stood there until the taillights disappeared down the street. She went inside, leaned against the door, and whispered to herself. What just happened? She had no idea that the man she returned a ticket to tonight would soon love her. Ariella didn't expect to see him again. The morning after the theater, she stood behind the counter at Café Rosette, wiping down espresso machines and pretending she hadn't replayed every minute of the night on repeat. She poured oat milk into a regular's latte, nodded through a rushed conversation about almond croissants, and kept glancing toward the door like something or someone might walk through it. By noon, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She stepped behind the pastry case, out of view, and answered. "Is this Ariella Hayes?" a smooth, professional voice asked. "Yes. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Kellan Grant. He asked me to confirm if you'd be available for a private tour of the Hamilton Art Conservatory tomorrow afternoon." She stared at the display case like it might offer answers. "I'm sorry, what? The conservatory? Mr. Grant said you're an artist. He's arranged a private viewing. If you're interested, I'll send a car to your address." "How did you?" He mentioned you'd be surprised. Ariella hung up, still stunned. The Hamilton Conservatory was notoriously exclusive, members only, invite only, and usually full of people who wore silk scarves like armor. She'd never stepped foot inside. The next day, the car came exactly at 3. Not a limo. A deep navy town car with tinted windows and a driver wearing an actual cap. She almost laughed climbing in, her paint-stained Converse a stark contrast to the spotless leather seats. The conservatory was even more intimidating than she imagined. All glass and marble, with sweeping arches and curated silence. But the moment she stepped inside, she saw him. Kellan stood at the far end of the atrium, hands in his pockets, wearing a gray jacket that made him look more like a poet than a CEO. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and smiled, not like someone trying to impress her, but someone genuinely glad she came. "You remembered," she said, walking toward him. "I hoped you would. This place is." She glanced around, trying to find the right word. "Intimidating. Good. That means it's doing its job." He motioned toward the wide, empty gallery doors. "Come on, I had them keep the wings open late." As they entered, the quiet swallowed them. The space was bathed in natural light from the skylights above, illuminating oil paintings, sculptures, and mixed media installations. Ariella drifted toward a giant canvas splashed with violent reds and golds, instinctively tilting her head. "You're not going to ask me what it means?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "I don't think art needs to explain itself. It just has to make you feel something." He glanced at her. "What do you feel? Like I'm standing in someone else's dream?" He looked at the painting. "That's exactly what I thought." They moved slowly through the gallery, Ariella stopping every few feet. Kellan didn't rush her. He watched her, not like a man trying to impress someone, but like he was trying to understand her. "So why this?" she finally asked, stopping at a sculpture of a woman carved in stone, her hands reaching upward. "This place used to be my escape," he said. "Before things got complicated, and are they complicated now?" He hesitated. "Every day." She turned to him. "Then why bring me here?" "Because you don't look at me like everyone else does." "And how's that? Like I owe you something?" She didn't know what to say to that. They stopped in front of a painting of a girl sitting in a window, her face turned away. Something about it made her chest tighten. "I'd paint her," Ariella said quietly, "but I'd give her eyes and a reason to be looking out." "You paint people often." "Not lately. I've been working doubles. Can't afford canvases right now." He didn't respond, but the pause stretched long enough that she felt it. "You don't have to fix it," she said gently. "I'm not your project." He looked surprised. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think. You're kind and generous, but I'm not used to people like you." "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "You think I'm one of them." "I'm not." "Then who are you, Kellan?" He studied her for a moment, still figuring that out. They left the gallery as the sun dipped behind the skyline. On the steps, she turned to him. "That wasn't just a tour." "No," he said. "It wasn't. You're trying to show me something. You're the first person I've met in a long time who doesn't care about the version of me they read about." "I don't read about you," she said. "I don't have time to keep up with billionaires playing chess with real estate." He laughed. "Good. Because I'm terrible at chess." A silver car pulled up, but she didn't move toward it. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I wanted to." "Why?" "Because when you talk about art," he said, stepping closer, "you make me want to feel something again." She didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't. He opened the car door for her, and as she slid inside, he leaned down. "Next time," he said, voice low, "let me see one of your paintings." She nodded, heart beating too fast. As the car pulled away and the conservatory faded behind her, she stared at the city lights and wondered what was happening to her life. And why it suddenly felt like a story someone else might write down. Ariella stood in front of the cracked mirror in her apartment, brush in hand, trying to tame the wild curls that refused to behave. She'd been staring at the same canvas for days now, the one she'd pulled from behind the bookshelf after Kellan's unexpected challenge at the conservatory. The painting was half finished. A girl alone in a crowded cafe, her face turned toward a window streaked with rain. She dipped the brush into a jar of deep cerulean, then froze. Her hand hovered above the canvas, but the rest of her stayed still. There was something about creating again that made everything feel more fragile, more real. A knock on the door startled her. She wiped her palms on her jeans and opened it to find a young man in a dark blazer holding a small box. "I was told to deliver this to Miss Hayes." She signed the slip, shut the door, and opened the box. Inside was a folded note and a delicate silver key on a velvet ribbon. The note was handwritten in clean, slanted script. "For when you're ready to show me." She stared at it, then noticed the return address, an art studio in Soho. It didn't say his name. It didn't need to. The next evening, she hesitated outside the building, her fingers cold around the key. The studio was tucked between a wine bar and a boutique that sold nothing practical. The entrance was discreet, with no sign on the door. She let herself in and found a softly lit space with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the skyline like a painting of its own. Kellan stood near the back, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sketching something in a notebook. He looked up. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't either. I meant what I said. I want to see." She stepped inside, brushing past unfinished canvases and jars of brushes. "You don't even know if I'm any good." "I don't care if it's perfect. I care if it's honest." She pulled the rolled canvas from her bag and slowly unfurled it on the nearest table. He studied it without speaking. After a long moment, he asked, "Is she lonely?" "She's waiting for something she doesn't believe will come," he nodded slowly. "That's what I see too." She looked around. "This place is beautiful. Do you paint too?" "I used to, not since my father died." Her gaze flicked to him. "What did you paint?" "Landscapes. Places that didn't exist except in my head." He said they were distractions. "Sounds like he didn't get it." "No," Kellan said. "He didn't get a lot of things." There was a heaviness in his voice she hadn't heard before. He didn't elaborate and she didn't press. Instead, she walked toward the windows. "Why me?" He joined her, leaning against the frame. "Because you look at the world like it still has something left to offer." "I don't always feel that way." "Neither do I," he said. But when I'm with you, I forget how exhausting everything else is. She glanced at him. You know this doesn't make sense, right? Most things that matter don't. They stood in silence, the city flickering below them. I'm not someone who fits in your world, she said quietly. Then I'll change the shape of it, he replied. She turned to him, heart hammering. That's not something people just say. I don't say anything I don't mean. He stepped closer, and this time he didn't hesitate. His hand found the side of her face, his thumb brushing just under her eye. When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or tentative. It was decisive, warm, and steady, like he'd been waiting for exactly the right moment. And when she kissed him back, it wasn't because she was swept up in a fantasy. It was because something real had taken root, and she didn't want to run from it. After he rested his forehead against hers, I don't want this to be something fleeting, he said, voice low. Then don't let it be. He looked at her like he wanted to say 100 things, but settled on one, come with me tomorrow. Where? There's an event. Charity auction at the Langford. Boring, formal, obnoxiously expensive, but I want you there, she hesitated. I don't even own a dress that's not from a thrift store. I already took care of that. Her eyebrows lifted. You bought me a dress. I had it sent to your apartment. It should be there by now. You're impossible. Persistent, he corrected. She laughed under her breath. I'm not walking into a ballroom full of socialites without backup. You'll have me. That's not comforting. You'll change your mind when you see the dress. She shook her head, but the smile stayed. You're going to make everything complicated, aren't you? I hope so, he said. Because this, you and me, it's worth complicating everything for. She didn't say anything, but the quiet way she leaned into him said more than words ever could. Later that night, back in her apartment, she found the box sitting just inside her door. Inside was a gown the color of moonlight, impossibly soft and clearly custom cut. No tags, no receipt, just a small card tucked into the folds of silk. Wear this when you're ready to be seen. She didn't sleep much, not because she was nervous, but because for the first time in years, something good was happening, and she wasn't sure if she was brave enough to let it. The Langford Hotel glittered like a palace carved from crystal, its columns wrapped in soft gold light and the grand entrance marked by a velvet carpet that stretched onto the pavement like a crown's red tongue. Ariella stepped out of the town car, her fingers curled around the small satin clutch Kellan had given her. Her heels clicked against the polished marble as she was ushered inside, the distant sound of a string quartet echoing through the chandeliered lobby. Kellan was already waiting near the ballroom entrance, dressed in a tailored navy tuxedo that made him look like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. But the moment he turned and spotted her, the sharpness of his expression softened into something unguarded. "You're late," he said, eyes sweeping over her. "Traffic," she replied, brushing a curl behind her ear. "And I had to figure out how to breathe in this thing." "It suits you," he said, stepping closer. "You look like you walked out of a dream I've had before." She rolled her eyes, but her voice was quiet. "You always this good at making people forget their doubts." "No," he said. "Only when I mean it." A man with a tray passed by and Kellan snagged 2 flutes of champagne, handing her one. He didn't point out that everyone in the room was watching them. He didn't have to. She could feel it, the weight of 100 curious stares. But none of it mattered when he placed his hand gently on the small of her back and guided her forward. Inside, the ballroom was a cascade of candlelight and music, the tables draped in white satin, the walls glowing under crystal sconces. The auction stage stood at the far end, framed by massive arrangements of white orchids and glass sculptures that glittered under the lights. "Who are all these people?" she asked under her breath. "Investors, donors, board members. People who want to be seen, and people who want to make sure they're seen with the right people. So why are you here?" "Because I promised to donate a piece from my mother's collection," he said, his voice quieter now. "And because I wanted you to see what this world looks like when it's not just a headline." They took their seats at a table near the front, where name cards marked Kellan's place beside the chairman of the board. and a woman wearing a diamond necklace that probably cost more than Ariella's entire apartment building. The woman leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "And who is this?" she asked, her voice smooth and sharp. Before Ariella could respond, Kellan placed his hand over hers on the table. "This is Ariella Hayes," he said simply. "She's with me." The woman's expression flickered for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled too widely and turned away. "You didn't have to do that," Ariella whispered. "I don't care what they think," he said. "I care what you feel." She looked at him, and for the first time tonight, the noise faded. She wasn't just surviving the evening, she was part of it. When the auction began, Kellan stood to present the painting. He donated a small but striking piece by an artist Ariella recognized immediately. One of the only women of color in the city's elite art circles. The announcer mentioned the provenance, the significance, the estimated value. But Kellan interrupted before the bidding began. "This painting belonged to my mother," he said, his voice steady. "She bought it when no one else saw its worth. She said beauty should never need permission to exist." A murmur swept through the room. "So tonight," he continued, "I'll match whatever the final bid is and donate both sums to fund programs for underrepresented artists in the city." The room erupted in applause, but Ariella didn't clap. She just watched him. Later, as they stepped out onto the terrace for air, she leaned against the railing, letting the cool night press against her bare shoulders. "I didn't expect that," she said. "I didn't plan it," he replied. "I just looked at you and realized I couldn't keep pretending I'm not trying to be someone better." She turned to him. "You already are." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. "I know I come from a world that doesn't make sense to most people, and I know you didn't ask for any of this. But I'm not asking you to change who you are, I'm asking you to let me in," she swallowed. "And if I say yes, I'll prove every day that you were right to. And if I say no, I'll keep showing up until you change your mind." She laughed softly, looking up at the stars. "You're impossible." "You already said that," he said. "Try something new." She turned to face him fully now, her eyes searching his. "I'm scared. I am too, but I don't want to be anymore." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. "Then come with me. There's a retreat next weekend. No cameras, no press, just trees, air, quiet. I booked a cabin for both of us." She blinked. "You planned a weekend away before even knowing if I'd say yes." "No," he said. "I booked it the moment you let me see your painting." Something shifted then. The tension between them wasn't sharp anymore. It was warm, trusting. She took the envelope, tucking it into her clutch. "All right." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He kissed her again, this time slower. There were no fireworks overhead, no applause. Just the quiet certainty of two people who had finally stopped pretending they weren't falling. The next morning, he showed up at Café Rosette just as she was finishing her shift. He wore jeans and a navy jacket and carried a paper bag that smelled like croissants. "Breakfast and answers," he said, sitting beside her at the outdoor table. "Answers?" He handed her a folded sheet. "I spoke to the conservatory. They're opening a residency program. I gave them your name." Her heart stopped. "Kellan, I didn't ask for that. I know. But they asked for you." She looked at him, stunned. "I want to see your work hanging in a place like that," he said. "Not because of me, because it deserves to be." "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just keep painting." She reached across the table, her hand finding his. "We're really doing this." "We are," he said, lacing his fingers with hers. "One dropped ticket at a time." They sat in the morning sun, croissants between them, the world quieter than usual, not because it had changed but because they had, and for the first time it all felt exactly right. The cabin was tucked deep in the Catskills, hidden behind rows of evergreens, and wrapped in the kind of hush that made Ariella feel like they'd stepped into a different life. The moment they arrived, she kicked off her boots and stood by the fireplace, watching Kellan set down the groceries he insisted on carrying himself. "You weren't kidding about no-cell service," she said, holding her phone up to a blank screen. "That's the idea," he replied, unpacking eggs and fresh bread. 3 days without distractions, just us." She walked to the window, watching the mist cling to the trees. It doesn't feel real. Maybe that's what makes it worth it. The weekend unfolded in a rhythm neither of them had known they craved. Mornings started late, with coffee in mismatched mugs and heat from the fire rather than deadlines. Kellan cooked surprisingly well, and she painted in an old notebook she found buried in her backpack. There were no grand revelations, just quiet, trust, the kind of closeness born not from words but from presence. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch steps sketching a pine cone she'd picked up on a hike, Kellan dropped beside her with a folded blanket and a look she hadn't seen before. Not intensity, not charm, vulnerability. "I need to tell you something," he said, eyes fixed on the woods. She set her pencil down. "Okay. You know that I've been trying to step back from Grant Industries, but I haven't told you why." She waited. "My father left everything to me, the business, the properties, the board seats, but he also left behind a mess, legal disputes, lawsuits. People he underpaid, people he silenced." Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. "I've spent the last year unraveling it, selling off the worst contracts, donating the profits to clean up what he buried. You never mentioned any of that. I didn't want you to think I was trying to be a hero. I'm not. I'm just trying to make sure the name I carry doesn't crush anyone else." She reached for his hand. "You didn't have to be perfect for me to love you, Kellan." His head turned sharply. "Say that again," she blinked. "What? You've never said it before." She hadn't realized she had, but now that it was out, it didn't feel fragile. It felt true. "I love you," she said, this time without hesitation. His eyes searched hers like he was looking for something to tether himself to. "I've wanted to hear that since the night you handed me that ticket. I've wanted to say it since you looked at my painting like it mattered." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She stared at it, heart thudding hard enough to echo. "I didn't plan this," he said. "I didn't bring it to trap you or rush you. I've had it for weeks now. I just didn't know when it would be right," she swallowed. "And now, it's right." He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike anything she expected. A delicate band set with a single sapphire circled by tiny diamonds. Not flashy, not loud, just beautiful. "I want to build something with you," he said, his voice steady. "Not a legacy, not a brand, a life. One where you can paint and be messy and honest and brilliant, and I can finally stop pretending I want anything other than you." She stared at him, breathless. "You don't have to answer now. You can think about, yes." He blinked. "What? Yes," she said again, laughing through the tears suddenly stinging her eyes. "Kellan, yes, of course. Yes." He let out a breath that sounded like relief and joy poured into one and pulled her into his arms as if he couldn't stand another second of space between them. They stayed like that for a long time, the wind rustling through the trees around them, the fire crackling softly inside. 2 months later, the conservatory hung her first full collection. The opening night was packed, her name printed in bold letters across the entrance. She wore a simple black dress and shook so many hands she lost count, but her eyes always found Kellan's in the crowd. He didn't hover or perform. He just stood back, letting her shine. When it was over, he drove her to the rooftop of the building they'd just bought together in Brooklyn. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a loft with wide windows and creaky floors and a sunroom she'd already claimed as her studio. He carried her up the last flight of stairs, ignoring her protests, and when he set her down, she turned to find the space lit with hanging lanterns and soft music playing from an old record player. "You did all this?" she asked, breathless. "I promised you a life," he said. "This is just the beginning." They danced under the stars, barefoot and laughing, the city lights flickering below them like old friends. Later, lying tangled together on the floor with nothing but a blanket and the sound of distant horns, she whispered, "Do you think this is what forever feels like?" "No," he said, brushing her hair from her face. "I think this is what right now feels like. And that's better." She kissed him then, slow and sure, with the kind of certainty that didn't need a stage or spotlight, just him, just her, and everything they'd built between them. A year later, they married in a quiet ceremony in the garden behind the conservatory. Her gown was simple, her vows handwritten. He cried the moment he saw her, no shame in it. The guests were few, friends, her students, a few of his mother's closest charity partners. No press, no spectacle, just love. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, someone tossed petals into the air, and Kellan leaned down to whisper, "Still think we're too different," she lifted her chin, grinning. "I think we're exactly the same where it matters." He kissed her, not caring about the applause or the laughter or the photos being taken. Because in that moment, there was only one thing that mattered: they had chosen each other, and nothing else could ever outshine that.